Dennis the Menace feels like a kid movie that should be simple. One blonde tornado in overalls. One quiet suburban street. Walter Matthau trying to protect a single peaceful day and losing it scene by scene. A sidewalk turned into a war zone. A visit next door that becomes a full-scale invasion. But under all that suburban chaos, the movie carries a meaner edge. The search for Dennis was massive. Around 20,000 kids in the mix. Christopher Lloyd played it so hard it didn't just unsettle the audience, it scared the kids on set. And after hit, it tried to grow into a franchise, then faded so fast most people forget it happened. These are 11 weird facts about Dennis the Menace, the family comedy that looks harmless, while constantly flirting with disaster underneath. Number 1. Dennis the Menace began as a comic strip in 1951, and the character came straight from real life. Cartoonist Hank Ketchum did not sit down and invent a troublemaker. He looked at his own son and drew what he saw. The kid would not nap, tore up his room, and turned ordinary afternoons into small emergencies. After one especially rough episode involving a wrecked bedroom, Ketchum's wife snapped and said, "Your son is a menace." That line handed the strip its entire identity. Dennis was never a villain. He was a collision between childish energy and adult patience, a kid who keeps crashing into the world with good intentions and no awareness of the destruction he leaves behind. Then the story got stranger. On March 12, 1951, the exact same day the American strip launched, a completely separate British comic with the same name debuted across the Atlantic. No connection, no shared plan, just one of the strangest coincidences in comic history. The British version became rougher and more deliberately troublesome. The American one stayed rooted in innocent chaos. And what started as a single strip quietly grew into something much bigger. Number 2. Dennis survived not because every version of him worked, but because the character itself was too strong to kill. After the strip caught on, Hollywood and television kept returning to him. The CBS sitcom in 1959 gave Dennis his first major screen life, while the comic was still popular, and for a while the formula held. Then, the cracks appeared. Child-centered shows have a built-in problem. Kids grow up, and Dennis only works at a very specific age. As Jay North got older, the menace energy faded. Then Joseph Carnes, who played Mr. Wilson, died suddenly in 1962, and the heart of the show went with him. But the comic strip kept running, and that kept Dennis culturally alive even when the TV version lost its footing. He drifted into mascot territory, appearing with brands like A&W and later Dairy Queen, recognizable enough to move through American pop culture on instinct alone. The 1986 animated series ran 2 seasons and produced 78 episodes, modernizing Dennis for a new generation and even bringing in Phil Hartman to voice a cartoon Mr. Wilson. Then came a live-action attempt in 1987, later renamed Dennis the Menace, Dinosaur Hunter, which tried to push the franchise somewhere new and missed badly. Dennis only works when the chaos feels innocent. Push him past that line, and he stops being mischievous and starts being exhausting. The strip kept him alive through every stumble, giving Hollywood enough reason to keep swinging. Number 3. By the early 1990s, the timing could not have been better. Hollywood had developed a full obsession with kids causing disaster, and the reason was Home Alone. When that film exploded in 1990, studios stopped treating mischievous children as a risk and started treating them as a formula. A kid at the center, adults losing control, a neighborhood swallowed by chaos. That setup was suddenly everywhere. Problem Child, Uncle Buck, and others were all feeding the same hunger. Audiences wanted stories where children were not background figures, but the engine driving everything, usually by turning adult life into a slow-motion emergency. Dennis fit that moment perfectly. He was already famous, already built around domestic destruction, already carrying the exact energy studios were chasing. He did not need to reinvent himself. The culture had shifted toward him. And from a business angle, these films were cheap to make, appealed to both kids and parents, and could extend into merchandise and reruns if they connected. Dennis the Menace looked less like a gamble and more like an obvious move. Number 4. Warner Brothers had a second reason to push this film forward beyond just the trend. They wanted John Hughes back. Warner had watched Home Alone become a massive hit and knew better than anyone what it meant to have Hughes in your corner. They still held the feature rights to Dennis the Menace and had been trying to develop it for years. At one point, Tim Burton had even been considered as a possible director, but nothing came together. The property sat until it became useful as leverage. Hughes did not say yes immediately. He had spent his career building original material, and adapting someone else's creation was not his natural instinct. But Dennis was different. Hughes had genuinely loved Hank Ketchum's strip since he was young. Once Warner arranged a meeting with Ketchum himself, everything shifted. Hughes went straight to the source. He had no interest in recreating the 1959 TV series. He wanted the original comic strip version, the one built around a very young child, constant good intentions, and total accidental destruction. Once that shape was clear, the movie stopped feeling like a studio trying to dust off an old property and started feeling like a genuine Hughes project. Number 5. That naturally raised the question of whether this was just Home Alone with a different kid. In some ways, the comparison was fair. The film carries that same late Hughes energy, slapstick damage, domestic chaos, a child making adult life unbearable. The studio clearly understood that audiences had already proven they would show up for exactly this kind of movie. But the difference between Dennis and Kevin McAllister is everything. Kevin is calculated. He identifies the threat, designs the traps, and executes a plan. He knows exactly what he is doing. Dennis operates on a completely different frequency. He is younger, less aware, and causes destruction entirely by accident. He does not ruin your afternoon because he planned to. He ruins it because he is Dennis. That changes the entire comic rhythm. Home Alone is built on setup and payoff, the machine Kevin builds, and the burglars walking into it. Dennis the Menace is messier and looser, built around adults stumbling into the fallout of a child who genuinely means no harm. One film runs on strategy. The other runs on a kind of cheerful, unstoppable chaos that nobody can predict or prepare for. Number 6. Nothing in the film mattered more than casting the right Dennis. The production sent out a nationwide call and received around 20,000 audition tapes. They were not looking for a polished child performer. They were looking for a kid who could make Dennis feel real, someone who carried that specific combination of innocence and destructive energy without seeming to try. The list narrowed from thousands to hundreds, then to around 10 finalists, each of whom was tested directly opposite Walter Matthau, because the Dennis and Mr. Wilson dynamic is the entire machine of the movie. Get that wrong, and nothing else works. Then Mason Gamble walked in and pulled live worms out of his pocket during the audition. It was not a calculated actor move. It was just genuinely strange and perfectly Dennis, and the room knew immediately. After he screen tested with Matthau, the decision was unanimous. Gamble had the unpredictability, the sweetness, and the quality that is hardest to fake, the ability to cause total chaos while still seeming completely harmless. He was not far from the character in real life either. He later admitted to breaking a window with a baseball, which is exactly the kind of accidental damage Dennis Mitchell leaves behind without a second thought. Number 7. Finding Dennis was only half the casting challenge. The film also needed the right adult to absorb the damage, because Mr. Wilson is not just a comic target. He is the emotional center of everything Dennis crashes into. Too soft, and the joke disappears. Too bitter, and the movie turns mean. Walter Matthau was the answer. He had the face, the voice, and the specific kind of exhausted dignity the role demanded. He could walk into a frame already looking like Dennis had destroyed his morning before the camera rolled. But more importantly, he carried warmth underneath the irritation, just enough humanity that Mr. Wilson never feels like he truly despises the child. He feels like a man who cannot believe this specific kid happened to move in next door. Matthau and Gamble developed a genuine bond during production, which gave their scenes a texture that moved naturally between frustration and reluctant affection. The performance landed so completely that kids kept stopping Matthau in public to call him Mr. Wilson for years afterward, which says everything about how fully he inhabited the role for that generation. Number 8. The film still needed one more element to work: a real villain. Not a bumbling comic figure designed to take hits and stagger around. Something with actual threat. Christopher Lloyd got the role of Switchblade Sam, and the backstory behind it, makes the casting even better. Hughes had previously offered Lloyd the role of Harry in Home Alone. Lloyd passed. Then Home Alone became one of the defining comedy hits of its era, the kind of miss that stays with you. When Hughes came back with Dennis the Menace, Lloyd was not passing again. But Hughes did not give him another lovable crook to play. Switchblade Sam is leaner and stranger than the Wet Bandits, less interested in being funny, more interested in being unsettling. Lloyd played him without softening the edges, and the result was a villain who genuinely unnerved the younger cast. One child actor became so frightened after a scene involving Lloyd and a knife that he could not look at him for the rest of production. That kind of reaction tells you exactly how close Lloyd was playing it to something real. Number 9. The slapstick that holds the movie together was not accidental. Dennis does not cause small inconveniences. He causes physical events, and the film commits to staging them that way. Falls had to land correctly. Props had to break at the right moment. Timing had to be precise enough that the damage felt real for a split second before snapping back into comedy. The most committed example is the slingshot gag, where the production built an actual oversized replica of Walter Matthau's mouth so the camera could push inside it in absurd close-up detail. That is an enormous practical investment in a ridiculous joke, which is exactly the point. The movie treats every piece of Dennis's chaos as a major physical incident worthy of full commitment. That is why the slapstick works. It never feels casual or throwaway. It feels like the film genuinely believes that one small kid's neighborhood destruction deserves to be staged like a natural disaster. Number 10. When the film opened in June 1993, audiences made their opinion clear immediately. The movie earned over $117 million worldwide against a budget of around $35 million. Families showed up, the character connected, and the studio got exactly what it had been looking for. Critics were a different story. The backlash was sharp, with complaints about the film being too broad, too cartoonish, and too disconnected from anything grounded or real, which is a strange criticism to level at a movie based on a comic strip character whose entire identity is suburban exaggeration. The film was never trying to be realistic. It was trying to be chaotic, and it succeeded. Walter Matthau drew consistent praise even from hostile reviews because he gave all that destruction a human target and made the suffering genuinely funny. Christopher Lloyd's darker performance split people. But the audience verdict was simple. They bought tickets, they enjoyed it, and the critical displeasure did not change any of that. Here is the rewritten script at 2,400 words, with the first paragraph kept exactly as is. Number 11. The 1993 film was not the end of the franchise, though what came after barely qualifies as continuation. Dennis the Menace Strikes Again arrived in 1998 with a completely different cast, and the problem was obvious from the start. Mason Gamble was gone. Walter Matthau was gone. And without those two, the central relationship that made the original work simply did not exist. Dennis and Mr. Wilson were not interchangeable roles. They were a specific dynamic built between two specific performers, and replacing them meant starting from nothing. Then, in 2007, A Dennis the Menace Christmas appeared, nearly 15 years after the original, with yet another cast and an even looser connection to what came before. By that point, the name was functioning more as a brand label than a genuine creative continuation. Most people who loved the 1993 film either never saw the sequels, forgot they existed, or remember them only as the lesser versions that missed everything that made the first one matter. The bonus fact completes the picture. The animated series that launched alongside the 1993 movie, titled All New Dennis the Menace, lasted just 13 episodes before disappearing. It went too restrained and quiet, missing the loud, energetic chaos the character needs to work in short bursts. The video game fared even worse. The Super Nintendo version looked appropriate but played like punishment, with sprawling levels and a timer that crushed any enjoyment. The Amiga version shipped with a final jump that was literally impossible to clear. The developers ran out of time and released an unfinishable game. That detail captures everything about what happened after the film peaked. The movie had real momentum. Nothing built around it could match it. Dennis the Menace was a genuine hit, and everything that followed felt like the slow fade of something that had already given its best. In the end, Dennis himself still works. One kid, good intentions, no brakes, and an entire neighborhood stuck inside the blast radius. The chaos stays innocent. The damage never does.